So I'm with Eliana Dunlap. We're at the Biosphere 2 in Oracle, Arizona. So Eliana, welcome to Conscient Podcast.
Thank you.
So what we'll do is talk about your work, and I'll ask you to answer. There we have a little sound event beside us here. We're going for a walk on the grounds here. So the question that I ask everyone in this program is, how do the arts contribute to environmental awareness and action? But before you answer that, because it's a big question, you can answer it in many ways. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you come from, a little bit of background.
Okay, my name's Eliana. I'm originally from Boston, born and raised, and that's where I live right now as well. My background is in Circus Arts. I studied at the New England Center for Circus Arts and then at the École de Cirque de Québec in Quebec City. And I've worked professionally as a circus artist since 2016. And I'm also currently studying environmental sustainability and anthropology as an undergrad through Southern New Hampshire University. And I'm really looking at how to kind of bring those two things together and get the circus community a bit more socially and environmentally engaged in their work.
I've been observing the Circus Arts community, and I haven't noticed a lot of work about climate change, but I think you have a project that you're working on to try to engage the Circus Arts community. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so I run a project called the Circus Action Network, and the goal of the Circus Action Network is to try and network all the projects that do exist and the individuals that are working on social and environmental justice and circus and that intersection. Network them together so that we can become more of a community, we can share ideas and resources, and sort of be a landing place for people that want to get more involved in doing that kind of work. When I first started looking into that intersection and what was going on there, I felt like I really just had to fall down the right internet rabbit holes, and it was really hard to find the projects. They were really spread out, kind of on the fringes. And I really wanted a place to kind of consolidate that where we could really kind of create a movement out of those people, and a sense of community, because doing that kind of work alone feels very isolating as well. So that's sort of that project. We run a few different things. We ran a podcast for a while that's been on a bit of a hiatus, but we're looking to kind of start that up again. We run a Facebook page where we share other projects we find, or events, or opportunities, whether that's residency opportunities or funding or any other kinds of workshops, whatever. We have a blog that we've been trying to get up and running. We're looking at starting online video conference call discussions that kind of anybody can join in on. So we have a few different initiatives going. We're trying to compile resources. We're also working on developing a sustainable circus framework that so if there's a company or an individual that's interested in doing a project that's more rooted in sustainability, they could use that as a framework if they'd like. That sort of examines a lot of different facets and different approaches of how you can be sustainable and sort of really incorporate that into the fabric of the project.
So that sounds like you're tackling it from different angles, this sort of production, means, tools, recycling, that kind of thing, but also content. How do you, so to get back to my question, how do you think the arts contribute to environmental awareness and action?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways. So I really see the arts as, if you're working in the arts, you're working in culture, and I really see climate change and environmental issues as a cultural issue that is really rooted in our cultural values about how we relate to each other and how we relate to the environment. And so I think circus being part of the arts, I think pretty much anything you put on stage is either going to challenge culture or it's going to confirm culture. And so in doing that, you can really think about what are the cultural narratives and values that are really embedded in and underpinning that work, and you can shift those in whatever direction you want them to go. And so that's one way that I think the arts can help. And then I also think the arts, also just in terms of what is the process that we are using to to create these things, and does that process embody all those values? So both in terms of the production value, like you said, or the production process, like you said, or also in terms of how are we interacting with each other as we create this? What are the relationships we're developing with each other and with our set and with our space as we are making this? And is that also rooted in those values? I think is also an important aspect of it as well.
Well, we're here at a creative cultural leadership course, you and I and about 23 others from mostly the US, but a few from Canada, and looking at the notion of how we can encourage our colleagues in the arts and cultural sector to get more involved in the issue of climate change and sustainability, which is really the issue, because climate change is more of a symptom than... Yeah, we're just looking out. It's so beautiful. Huh? There's
a little deer.
Oh, yes, there it is.
Sorry, I
and
there's
well, of course, the people listening won't be able to see, but maybe I'll put a photo or something. But there's the Catalina Mountains over there. Oh, there's that deer.
Oh, there's a bunch of them.
So beautiful.
Whole family.
Can't hear them, but we can see them.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. This is all part of it, right? Because one of the things I do with this podcast is try to have conversations, like real conversations, with people that are snapshots of the person's thinking. So you've probably written, and you'll do more advocacy. There's probably a website that you can send people to, all that kind of thing. But it's to raise awareness about awareness, because that's an interest of mine as a Zen practitioner, and to look at what seems to be working in the arts community as ways to get the artistic community to do more, but also to get the public to benefit from the work of artists. Do you have any specific examples of work that you've seen or organizations that you've worked on?
Within the circus world?
Yes, or in the arts world in general, but just things that you see are working and that are making a difference.
I'd say in the circus world, there's one company I really like called Circus Arts. They're based out of Sweden, and they do their performances are very socially and environmentally engaged. They often deal directly with themes of major issues of the time. So a few years back, they did a show about migration and refugees. They did a show in response to the Me Too movement. They also work a lot with sustainability as a company. They have a team that's like their sustainability team, and they sort of evaluate how they're doing. They've done a lot of work at their headquarters to make it more sustainable, and then they also look at touring, and so they try to reduce flying as much as possible. They do carbon offsets anytime they do have to fly. They work with more sustainable shipping companies so that to move their sets around that use more efficient vehicles and things like that. So they've been doing a good job. And they also do something else I really like about what they do is that they also incorporate a lot of community outreach. So there's sort of a whole branch of circus called social circus that basically brings circus performance and also circus education to sort of usually to people that wouldn't otherwise have access to it. Oftentimes, at-risk youth is a really common demographic that social circus works with, or refugees, or disabled people, people like that. And so they've done a lot of community outreach as well, and they've done a really interesting job of incorporating that into their company in a way it's very integrated. It's not like its own separate program. So a lot of their performers will participate in those programs, and they'll work with people in those programs. And so I think that's another thing that I really appreciate about their approach, is that they have a really holistic way of looking at their role within the community.
Do you, if I was listening to you, and I am, I would wonder, what does circus art about climate change look like? Have you seen some of their work, or what aesthetically or in terms of content might transmit, artistic content about climate change?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways to approach that question. Some of the things I've seen other people do. For example, there's a group based out of Norway and Denmark, I believe, but they're from Scandinavia in general, called Acting for Climate, and they're a circus group, and they do environmentally themed performances, and last summer they toured a show around the Baltic on a sailboat, and they would actually do the performance on the sailboat, so they'd dock and people would watch from the shore. And then part of that was it sort of was like a show, but also sort of like a little mini festival, so they'd have activities and things you could participate in. And so I think just sort of like that setting and doing it on a sailboat, and like also some of the things I unfortunately wasn't able to see the performance, but I did speak with them about it. And so the ways that they would approach like their material use and the things that were actually talked about in the show all kind of addressed various issues relating to climate change and environmental pollution. I've also seen a friend of mine, also, he's originally from England, but he lives in Stockholm now, and he studied at the circus school in Stockholm. His name's Matt Horton, and he's an aerialist, and he has this project where he makes aerial rope out of found and recycled materials, and he has some really interesting, he told me a bit about his research, and he like played with different kinds of materials, and so some of them were made out of pieces of plastic, some of them were made out of like copper wiring, and sort of the different properties of those different apparatuses when they're made out of different things. And I think just knowing that about the apparatus and seeing that is definitely one way to kind of bring that through. And then I think also there's ways to do it like quite subtly. So I actually did a project last summer. It was a street show project with a friend of mine in Chicago. It was called What's the Plant? But the T was in parentheses. And it was me, my friend, and a plant was our third character. And so the whole show, like we tried not to really necessarily name the problem, but we tried to just sort of think about how we were interacting with each other and with the plant, and sort of look at, what are some of those more subtle narratives that were coming through that. We had like one bottle of water that we would share between the three of us, things like that. He's also a former biologist, so we would anytime we like had like a moment to change stuff, he would throw out some animal facts, things like that. But just sort of like, how are we interacting with our environment and with our plant, and what role does this plant play? We also made our own props, so we went and like found we got some old wood from Habitat for Humanity and like built some platforms that we needed. And so we were trying to really think about the whole process as how are we rooting sustainability into the process of creating this piece. So I think there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach that.
It makes me think about in this leadership course, and we're on day 2 of 5, but just yesterday we were talking about the idea of constraints, that artists are used to working with constraints, their financial, their infrastructure, and in a way climate change is forcing us all to hold back and to do things differently, think differently. And so artists are comfortable with constraints. They don't like poverty, of course, but they're used to working with constraints. So I think that those are ideas that are going to emerge in the arts as positive ways to address the incredibly complex issue of climate change, right? And so I'm interested in circus in particular, because I've noticed over the years that circus artists talk to me about the notion of risk, and how aesthetically that when you're on stage, you're taking a risk. And so it could be interesting to see what circus artists come up with in the coming years, both in terms of their behavior, or any artists, but in particular artistically. How will they approach the work? What kind of works will we see? What kind of venues will use, like you said, on a boat, or new ways of presenting the work? So before we end up, I'm just wondering that you have a sort of an action plan for the circus artists. Do you have any advice for circus artists or performing artists in general as to what would be like a next step for them to become more environmentally responsible, or at least more aware of the issue of climate change?
Like for people starting out trying to do that?
Yeah.
I would say ask yourself a lot of questions. I would say ask yourself what do you as an artist want to perpetuate in the world, and ask whether what you're doing is perpetuating that. Because I think I talk to a lot of other circus artists, and something I've noticed is there's a lot of people that end up performing things that they don't actually feel that great performing, because it sort of puts forward or perpetuates some sort of cultural narrative that they don't agree with, and they feel uncomfortable about that. I've been in that position before where I've been told, okay, this is what you're performing, this is how you're doing it, and I've felt very uncomfortable on stage. And I realize that you don't always have, as an artist, sometimes as a circus performer, sometimes your role is to interpret someone else's vision, so you don't always have that control. But I would just encourage people that when they do have that control, or whenever there is a dialogue between the performer and the director, to kind of bring up those ideas of what are we trying to perpetuate in the world, and is what we're doing now doing that? Is it perpetuating the values and the culture that we want to see? And I think starting from that fundamental place, there are a lot of different avenues you can take in that exploration, but I think you kind of need to start from that foundation.
That sounds good, Eliana. It's time for us to go back to our chorus. Thank you for taking time to chat with me. And it certainly is interesting to hear the fact that you're studying sustainability, so you're getting your science chops together, and you're continuing as a performer and as an activist, or at least an organizer of your community. I admire that, and thank you for it.
Thanks so much.
Okay, cheers.